So there's a lot of things that we can do to be able to give our level more life. We can add atmospheric effects, we are going to create a more dynamic lighting system, and we can also create some nice animations with our lights. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take the material here and make it so that this light turns on and off and pulses, and it's going to look really cool. So we're going to open up our light material, and we're going to be working with our emissive map. So I'm just going to take these guys and I'm going to move them out of the way. And we're going to be using a couple of different nodes. If you're familiar with UDK, these might sound familiar, but I'll go over them, of course. So the first thing we need is a time node. And time node adds time to other material nodes. So like a panner, it will tell it how fast to pan, or for a cosine node, it will tell it how fast the wave should fluctuate. So we're actually going to be using a cosine node. So I'm just going to grab a cosine node out, and I'm just going to open it up, and I'm going to plug it in. Now, you can see that it turned white, and if we go up to our top bar and hit live nodes, it's going to display all our nodes in real time, and we can see it's fluctuating. We can actually increase the period to something like 5, and it's going to create a very slow switch from black to white. If I go back and set it to like 0.25, let it compile, it's going to be very fast. So before I give somebody a seizure, let me turn that off. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking our time and cosine node, and we're going to multiply it together with our emissive map. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to grab the output of my multiply and plug it into this guy right here. And let's see what we get. So as you can see, it is going from black to the full blue. So if I go to a place where you can see the emissive map right there, and I'm just going to drag this guy and I'm going to plug him into our emissive map. Let's see what happens. Cool, so it's turning on and off. But what's happening is it's effectively taking our emissive channel and setting it to 0, and it's creating this weird kind of like orange color. And the way that we're going to fix that is by clamping down our cosine value. So we're going to come up here, and we're going to type in clamp, drag it out, plug it in. So now, as you can see, it's only going from 0 to 1. If we save this and close out here, our lights are turning on and off. So this would be really useful if you have like warning lights that are warning you of something that's going to be coming up. And that looks really cool. Sweet. So I'm going to turn that off, but I'm actually going to open this up. And I want to set my time, my period to something a lot higher, like 10. Because if it's too fast, then people will kind of be like, why is that pulsing so quickly? But here it's just kind of like fading out, and you're just kind of going along, and then it fades back in, you see it, and it kind of just creates a little bit more life in the level. And I think the next thing I want to do is I actually want to expand our level out a little. Really quickly, I'm just going to turn off my lighting so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to grab all the major architecture of the level. So the background walls, the girder separators, the top and bottom of the stage. And I'm just going to grab all that, and I'm just going to hold Alt on my keyboard and Shift and drag it. And because of the way that we set this up, we should just be able to snap it right into place. Let's see how that is. Oh, a little bit more. One more. Cool. And to hide the seam in between these guys, I'm just going to drag my girder over. So now, when we go and play, we have a little bit more area to run around in. Although there's not any lighting down here, but that'll be fine for now. So now it looks like, we have more gameplay area. Now, the next thing I want to do is create a post-process volume. Now, a post-process volume is something that we could spend hours on talking about. So we're only going to touch on a few things that I think are relevant to the side-scrolling game. So to create a post-process volume, you go to your visual mode, and at the very top there's a post-process volume. And we're just going to drag it out, and it creates this big box. Now, if you press R on your keyboard, it's going to switch to your transform tools, and you just want to create a box that is going to either encompass your entire level or part of your level. For right now, I'm just going to do part of it so we can show you the difference between the post-process effects when you go into it and out of it. So one of the cool things about Unreal 4 is you can actually modify your post-process volumes or other aspects of your game while you're running it. So if I just come and hit my play button, we're inside of our level. And if I hold Shift F1, I can grab my mouse cursor. And I'm just going to go over to my scene outliner and go down to post-process volume. And this is organized alphabetically. So here's our post-process volume. And we can do things like create different shadow tints or modify the color of the scene. We can also increase our bloom and our light propagation. We can also add an ambient cube map, and we can do some exposure stuff. We can modify lens flares, modify the ambient occlusion of our scene, depth of field, motion blur, screen space reflections, all sorts of different things. So one of the things that I think is cool is that you have the ability to turn on a vignette for your screen. So right here under scene color, there's this little thing that says vignette. If you turn it on, the default level is going to be 0, but I set it up to 1 so you can see this really easily. So right now we're outside of our post-process volume, but if I run over to it, you can see that the edges of our screen got dark. So let me run outside of it again. So I'm actually going to change our vignette color to something like pink. And if I run back into our post-process volume, we have this crazy pink vignette that's all around our screen. So this would be really cool if you wanted to do things like dream effects or something, I don't know. But you can see if I take it down from 1 to something more respectable, like 0.4 or something, 0.3. And you can change this to all sorts of different colors, like we can change it to blue, or we can change it to red, or yellow. If we change it to black, and then increase it all the way up to 1, we're going to get this kind of like, it makes it look like the screen is kind of drawing our eye to the center, which is pretty cool. So for right now, I'm going to turn off our vignette so we can work with some other stuff. For example, if I come down to our motion blur, we can turn our motion blur up, and the amount is the strength of motion blur. 0 is off. So I'm going to increase the max amount of my motion blur to like 100, which is way too high, but when we run through our post-process volume, it gets really blurry and kind of hard to look at. There's also things like screen space reflections, which is something that we're going to be dealing with later, as well as depth of field. But depth of field doesn't really apply for what we're doing right now. Ambient occlusion is important. For ambient occlusion, we can turn this up and turn our radius up, and then when we go into our post-process volume, the ambient occlusion of our objects is going to be increased. We can also just stand in our post-process volume and play with some of these things. So like our auto exposure is going to change the level of exposure in our scene. So the minimum brightness is now 3, and that's way too dark, so we can bring that back down. We can say that our max brightness is something like 6. And we can just control what the level of our scene is going to look like, controlling how much exposure the camera gets. So with the auto exposure tool, you can control the amount of brightness and darkness that's going to be in your scene. With the bloom, you can increase the intensity of the bloom that you're getting, so we can make this all sorts of crazy high numbers. So in my opinion, the best way to learn how to use a lot of these post-process effects is really just kind of like read the tooltips. If you hover over the name of them, they'll tell you what they do. So if you weren't sure what vignette did, under scene color, you just hover over it, and it's like 0 to 1. 0 equal off, no vignette. 1 equal strong vignette. Okay, now I know what that does. Vignette color, grain jitter. It tells you what these things do. For light propagation volume, the intensity, how strong the dynamic global illumination should be. So all of these things are pretty straightforward. So I'm going to escape out. And one of the things that you should be aware of that I forgot to mention is if you modify anything in your scene and then exit playing, it won't save to your post-process volume, so you'll have to remake those adjustments. There's also something called an atmospheric fog and an exponential height fog. An exponential height fog, if I just drag it into the scene and turn my lighting on, is going to add some fog to your level. And this can be good if you're looking for something like this. This is usually better for outside, but actually if we play and go to the middle here, it kind of looks like the fog is like really thick, and there's it kind of looks like it's dangerous and creepy, and it also gives us some nice bloom effects. It's also really good for if you have no lights in your scene or very few lights, you can create kind of like a silhouetted effect on the background. Kind of neat. So let me escape. And I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm also going to get rid of our post-process volume because we're not going to use that for right now. So now that we have all of our objects set up and we've talked about how to create some additional life to our scene, we can actually start working on the lighting to really just bring this to the absolute 11th level. So we'll get started on that now.